Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter Mcgraw.
Welcome back. I hope you're holding up okay. And with that in mind, I'm turning my attention to developing the solo community. I'm going to be hosting some live Zoom events where we can talk about how the podcast is going and you can talk to others about their single lives. Just go to the Solo Podcast page at petermcgraw.org to sign up. That is the Solo Podcast page at petermcgraw.org. As you know, I like to ask the question, are you the hero in the story of your life? In this remote taping, I talked to a writer, editor, and expert on story structure. We discussed the hero's journey and how it applies to you and the changes you want to make due to the pandemic or otherwise. We discussed so many things, but a couple things that I like is the need for the hero to make an internal and external change, and the value of allies and enemies, and that these enemies may be people close to the hero. We lean heavily on The Matrix as an example of a hero's journey. You don't have to know the movie, but it will help. If you stick around to the end, for the bonus material, my guest dissects some well-known stories from a hero's journey perspective. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter Mcgraw. Today's guest is Kimberly Kessler. Kimberly is a writer, filmmaker, and StoryGrid certified editor. She also is an expert in the hero's journey, which that will become very important just momentarily. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Pete. It's so great to be here.
I know. I'm very excited for this. So this is the third remote taping from my hi-fi homestead out in the Joshua Tree Desert. Kim, where are you right now?
I am in Eastern Washington State, so just north of you.
Okay, so you are not living the monk-adjacent life that I am, are you?
No, I have a full house. Everyone has strict instructions to shut up while I'm in here doing this. So I have my husband and my 3 kids, so not a part of the solo journey, but I am a supportive ally in the work that you are doing.
You are indeed. You are, despite being happily married and a happy mother, you are sympathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, whatever it takes for you to self-actualize, that's what the world needs. So I'm all for it.
I have been treating this, the pandemic, the quarantine, as a call to action. So it has. I did a webinar recently. I've done some writing, like op-ed style writing, and so on. And I had a previous guest. For Chase Johnson, who is quote unquote sharpening his sword while he is quarantined, and we talked a little bit about this idea of a call to action. And so I'll just be very frank. I think that if you are not thinking hard about your health, your relationships, your career, in light of recent events, I think that you're missing an opportunity that we don't get in life, which is we don't get enough of a chance to sort of sit and reflect, and that it is often the case that problems cause us to pursue change more than good things do. When things are going well, you don't want to rock the boat, but when things go to shit, that's when you start to reevaluate and reassess. And I think obviously this is the definition of things going to shit right now. And so, but that term call to action has a very real meaning, doesn't it, Kim?
Yes, it does.
All right. So let's get into this. And so the call to action is part of what's called the hero's journey. And when I did my first sabbatical, this is now more than 7 years ago, I read the Robert McKee, is it Robert McKee book, Story. Mm-hmm. And I read it because that's the kind of thing you do on sabbatical. You read books that you wouldn't normally read. You think about things you wouldn't normally think about. You write about things you wouldn't normally write about. And I was starting to get into the idea of doing research on the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this is, and the book Story is one of those like classics. What would you call it?
Yeah, it's a cornerstone in what we know about story structure. It's kind of a lot of roads led to that book and have led from, have been prompted by that book, right? So it's definitely a place to begin when it comes to story structure and understanding how we as humanity organize our narratives.
Yes. And now, okay, so before we get into what exactly is the hero's journey, this is the sort of structure behind the story. What are the books that led to Story by McKee?
Well, I would just say that, there was a lot of work done on stories before. So certainly, all of Joseph Campbell's, his, seminal work. And also, there was like a literary critic, Norman Friedman, who did a lot of literary analysis, back in the 50s. And he was a professor, and was looking at how you would, analyze literature. So he has a lot of, papers that he published but even, going back into, Plato and Aristotle, right, that are talking about, that's the 3-act structure and all of these ideas and, all of these different, things that we would get when people, because basically what's interesting is, storytelling's been around since Homo sapiens have been around, right? That's like part of our evolutionary gifting is that we can tell stories so that people can learn lessons to prescriptive or cautionary tales to survive and thrive, right? So we've been doing this, but then we start getting people who are, it's like implicit knowledge that we have as a human. It's in our DNA. It's just part of who we are, the way that language is part of who we are. And so then you start getting people to explicitly look at it, right? They start like, you get the philosophers who start looking at why are things this way and how do we, and they start doing this. And so as we start to become, we have the benefit of technology, we have more time to sit around and think about things and ponder. And so it's not, and so not only do we start to become more self-aware of how we tell stories and the structure that lies beneath that, but the stories themselves start to change because now we don't just have to tell stories about tigers in the bushes, right? Now we get to tell stories about, self-actualization. It's not just about survival anymore. And so, so there's all kinds of fascinating things that have been going on in the world of storytelling. But Robert McKee's book is definitely, one that, any person who is interested in telling a story, has definitely read, and keeps it on hand for reference.
Yeah. It's sort of like if you're an aspiring screenwriter, this is one of the 10 books you should be reading.
Absolutely.
Right? That kind of thing. Right. So I think this idea, I think the average person, I think the idea of story has kind of come to become more prominent. You read about it more. There are people who talk about story. You might get a business consultant talking about story and so on. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the neat ideas, I think you're right about this idea of story, is that it's such a, obviously it predates writing,
absolutely,
and it was a way to pass knowledge on, and there seems to be something kind of special about that sort of 3-act structure. And then, of course, when people then, like Joseph Campbell and the folks who follow, then analyze it and then put it into a book, it sort of reinforces it in a sense, right? So then it becomes, I don't want to say a formula, but it becomes a format.
I think it explicitly, it's just like a model, right? It's like a model that we use to make sense of a pattern that we're seeing. And so the way that, which is what Joseph Campbell did, basically, he recognized the underlying pattern of of what people were implicitly doing, right? Cultures across, space and time are telling these myths to one, they're passing on these oral traditions, and yet they're all following there's this underlying structure that is, because that's how, what it comes down to ultimately is it's because it's how humans process change. So stories are really all about change. And so it's how we process change. And so, you were talking about how, right, we don't really want to change. Like, we'll stay in status quo as long as possible until we absolutely can't anymore. And that is basically what stories are about. How do you deal with unexpected events that drop in on your ordinary world that you avoided for as long as you can, right? Until you can't. And now what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you can't avoid the change?
Yeah, that's great, because what happens is, you might have a different way to talk about this, but I the way I have this is like the hero, right? So the hero of a story is living in his or her ordinary world, right? So whatever that might be, I like to talk about the Matrix, right? So that might be Neo in the Matrix, right? Neo is, a computer hacker. By day he works this sort of boring corporate job, and at night he's in the dark web, so to speak, right? And that's what he's doing. He's not a great employee. He's, he's kind of skirting the law and so on. I mean, that's his day-to-day kind of thing. And then there is this call to action, this call to adventure, that something external happens that you can't ignore, that's impossible to ignore. So that's my third point about Pete thinks is, here's your call to action, impossible to ignore. Now, what's interesting is you could have a story where Neo just decides out of the blue that he's going to go on some adventure. You know what I mean? Like, that could happen, but it's not a compelling story, right? Like, that doesn't happen in the movies and books very much, right?
And so, it does sort of, but it ends up being a slightly different flavor of story. And what happens, I think, is that he might decide to go on an adventure, but that's not the inciting incident. That is his ordinary world. He's like, I'm going to go on an adventure, but so then something else is going to happen that's going to be like, so you might think that you're just going to go do this thing, which actually will tie to one of the stories I'm going to talk about later, is that, you might think it's basically you have the ordinary world, I think, is nothing other than your plan. This is what I'm going to do. Yes. And maybe your plan is, I'm going to go on a road trip. Yay, road trip, right? It could be, I'm going to have an adventure. But you're going to do it based off of the, system one, right? Kim 1.0 is going on a road trip. But something unexpected is going to happen that's going to challenge the way I'm already perceiving that it's going to go, my intent, my goal, my essential action, like the thing that I'm like after, I'm going to be challenged. Got it. So anyway, it just kind of depends on, so you can have that. It's just then that's not necessarily what they're not being called to change yet, right?
Right.
So
I see. Okay, so I'm going to let you pick up this thing. So in the Matrix, the inciting incident, I'd like to think. Oh, by the way, so Kim already foreshadowed this. The bonus material today, I've asked Kim to dissect some well-known stories using the hero's journey, using the story structure, and showing how, like, different stories that seem wildly different still have this underlying model to them. I hope one of them wasn't the Matrix.
No, because I knew you would talk about that one. So I made sure I didn't pick that one.
So in the Matrix, that moment, that inciting incident is the FedEx agent comes, hands him the envelope. He opens up the envelope. There's a mobile phone in there. It hits his hand and it rings, and it's Morpheus on the other line. Morpheus is this entity, this myth that he's been searching for, on the dark web, so to speak. And Morpheus says, "They're coming for you. Listen to me if you want to get out." Right, and then now Neo is scrambling to avoid the bad guys. so to speak. And I think that's one of the elements of this is typically the hero is reluctant.
Yeah.
Right? Is reluctant to embrace this call to action.
Yes.
Correct?
Because we don't want to change. We don't want to change. Yeah.
It's scary.
It is scary. And it's part of our grieving process, right? It's like change is death, right? Like, because it's the loss of what was, right? So even if what's coming is better, it's unknown still. So, we talk about loss aversion, right? I don't want to lose what I have, even if, the potential for something to be better is still just an idea. It's not, there's no certainty in that. And so we double down on where we are and what we want and what we know for safety, right? Because that's what makes us feel safe. And again, that's sort of our, I don't know your lizard brain, right? Like kind of just being like survive.
Monkey mind.
Right. All of that is, it's just really, an important part of that process. And so you'll notice, I don't know if you've ever watched a story that, you're like, I don't know, I don't really buy it, is sometimes when people are too quick, like to change, which I think is what you were saying earlier, right? If you get this call to adventure and maybe they're like, yeah, I'm all about it. And again, it's like, sometimes that's not necessarily believable, because we're not wired that way. We know better, right? We're going to double down and avoid to change. We might want the results. We want the quick, give me I'll take the money or whatever, but don't make me change, right? Like, so it's not like we don't want the good stuff. We won't take the good, but if it's going to cost us something, then we are going to avoid it.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so first of all, what I'm I'm being very heavy-handed with this because I care about my listeners, and I want them to view this as sort of an opportunity. But I also am realistic to know that, again, that resistance is going to be there, the rejection of the call to action. So in the case of the Matrix, he's out on a ledge, whatever, 70 stories up. And he's facing this very scary moment, and he goes, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And he ends up being taken away in handcuffs.
Yes, exactly. And right, he decides, I'd rather be arrested than, he's not ready. So that is definitely him, that it's the refusal of the call, right?
Yes.
He's, even though what's so funny, and what I find so interesting about Neo's character, is that, he was seeking out the white rabbit, right? He's been looking for more. He was pursuing this, right?
Yes.
And he gets a phone call from the guy that
Morpheus.
He's like, okay, here's what to do. And then he's like, nope, can't do it.
Yep, can't do it. I think he even says, I can't do this.
Right.
I mean, I could be wrong. I'll try to see if I could find the video clip on YouTube, and I'll put it in the show notes. That's there. Okay. So, hero in the ordinary world, the call to action, the call to adventure. Initially, the hero rejects for the reasons that you've just stated, is that this is scary, it's hard, it's going to create change. I think that the listener can see this perhaps in their own life.
Right.
What happens next?
So next, we are going to have the meeting with the guide, which basically this is your mentor, the person who's going to help you, because none of us can really change on our own, right? You need someone who knows more, who's wiser, who's been through it before, who has a different insight, who has, the pessimist needs the optimist and the optimist needs the pessimist. Like, we need to be able to see that there's another way. Meeting with the guide or the mentor, in that case, that gives you, it gives you what you need so that you can take that next step. So, because originally, right, when you're refusing because it's the unknown, and you're like, I want it, but I can't do it. And so if you meet with a guide and they're like, okay, I know you can't do this one, so hold my hand and let's go, right? And then you jump together, right? And then you go into the unknown.
I am the mentor.
You are absolutely the mentor. You are protagonist in your own story, but definitely via this podcast, a mentor.
I'm trying to be the mentor. I'm being cheeky when I say that, but that's so that's the role. That's the role that I'm I'm meant to play in a listener's story, I hope, which is you can do this.
You can do this. Absolutely.
Okay. So in the case of the Matrix, it's Morpheus is the mentor.
Yes, Morpheus is his mentor.
In Star Wars, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi for Luke Skywalker.
Yep, absolutely.
Is there another story that people might be familiar with that that you can they can go, oh, that's a good mentor that I should think of?
Well, this is kind of an inverse one, but if you think about Rocky, right?
Yes.
And if you think about his manager, right?
Yes.
And in that case, it's his, what I love about that story is, his manager. I feel ridiculous that I can't think of his name. Mickey, thank you. Mickey kicks him out, right? He kicks him out of the gym. And so there's some really interesting things there. And that one, we'll talk about it in a little bit, that the Rocky is kind of an inverse of the hero's journey.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think it's like someone that it's basically like, you couldn't do this on your own. You need what this other person knows.
I'm sure there's I'm not familiar with Lord of the Rings, but I'm sure there's like...
Yeah, Gandalf is the mentor in that. Absolutely. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So there's this mentor who basically helps the hero become more courageous, right? Like if you're going to be a hero, you need to be courageous in some way, shape, or form.
And you need to, there's information that you don't have that you need. There's skills that you don't have that you need. And basically there's a lot of things maybe that you have in your programming and your way of thinking that you need to let go of, right? You need to release them, because they're in the way, right? So it could be selfishness. It could be fear, right? It could be, all kinds of things that are in the way of you self-actualizing. Right.
Okay.
And I would say, a heroic journey is about self-actualization, right? It's about getting out of your, where you are, your comfort zone, your known world. You're going to plunge into, right, this unknown, this chaotic world, the extraordinary world. And you're going to go down to the depths of it, right? And you're going to go through this thing and you're going to gain things down there that you're going to come out, being the master of both worlds. So you're going to go home at some point, but you're going to go home with treasure, right? So that's why we call them heroes, and they go on adventures and they go on these, they're going out, right? They're going out, if we talk about, you think about the, back in the early Homo sapien days, you have like, okay, we're all gathered around the campfire and where the light is and it's heat and it's warm, but we need someone who's going to go out into the dark, right? And they're going to go and they're going to come back and be like, check it out. I figured out that I can, I know how to take fire with me, or I went out and I was able to, I captured this, I found this other thing, and, like they'll bring stuff back. Right. And we'll get through it as we go through the hero's journey, but it's really about you need to leave because there's something to be gained by going, right? They're more like, what you're going to gain is worth so much more than what you're going to lose. And so you need someone who's been around the block before, who can basically shake you and say, Pete, like you got to get out, right? You can't stay here. It's time.
Yes, it's time.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's great. So the hero meets the mentor, guides them, helps them develop courage. What happens next? So then they
accept, right? They accept the call. Okay, let's do this. And then they cross the threshold and it's really, it's kind of the final farewell to the ordinary world. And they really do transition into the extraordinary world. And they're in a place, it's just, everything is new and different, Alice in Wonderland, right? You're kind of stepping in going, what the heck? And so what's so interesting, about this heroic journey is it really kind of takes place in 4 phases. So the first phase is we're in our known world. So it's like a known physical world and our known sort of mental world, right? Okay. And then we get like a chaotic sort of thing that pops in, an unexpected event comes in and challenges maybe the way we think, or it's maybe there's a meteor that's blown up our cave and now we got to go, whatever, right? And whatever it is. And so there's something that's making us physically leave, right? So we physically leave, but we bring our mindset with us. So we might physically change location, into this new extraordinary world, but we're still holding on to system 1, we are like, I am not going to change. And so what's so fascinating about once we step into the extraordinary world is that now you get to be tested, right? So the next phase is tests, allies, enemies. And it's where you're going to meet the threshold guardian who's going to challenge you, who has their own agenda. And you're going to end up, typically in some sort of conflict. You're going to, make allies, meet friends, like maybe gain some skills, right? You get to practice some tests, like retrieve a sword, learn some skills, there's all kinds of stuff. But you're also going to, oh, that's the bad guy, right? You're going to start to see that there's other conflicts out here that you're going to need to deal with, but you're not ready to deal with them yet. Because if you went head to head with the antagonist right now, they're going to absolutely,
they would win.
They would win.
Yeah.
And they do. You'll see them have a test that they will fail, right? Because they're not ready yet. They're still clinging to their old way of being, even though they're in this new world. They're like, okay, so one thing I want to make sure I bring up, and I think it makes sense to talk about it now, is that if you map the heroic journey with the Kubler-Ross change model, because again, that's how we process change, right? So, so the process of grieving, right, is basically you're choosing to, it's the same model. And that's why you'll just see this pattern repeat over and over and over again in all kinds of different places. And, it's how we, that's how we learn, it's how we teach something to someone. And so stories are so fascinating because it's distilling this pattern of how to process new information and make a change. But it's doing it in a way, it's kind of like subversive, right? It sneaks it in because you're fascinated, but it still gets in you.
So I want to highlight something. So I keep coming back. I'm just going to keep doing the Matrix because I know it. I know the story well. So there's a sort of famous scene in the Matrix, which is Morpheus tells Neo about what's going on for real. He tells him about the Matrix and so on. And then he gives him a moment of choice where he says, you could take the blue pill and go back to your life.
Yeah.
Or you could take the red pill and you could see the world for what it really is.
Yes.
Right. And so, and of course, Neo takes the red pill. If he didn't, the movie would be over, right? You
go back, you get plugged back in. Yep.
He gets plugged back into the Matrix. And then he takes, and of course, taking the red pill sets off a chain of events where this is not a pleasant world that's there.
Yeah. And so you can imagine, taking that pill, that's a point of no return, right? Once he gets, once he takes that pill and he makes that choice, that's when everything comes unplugged from him. And then the machines, right, that he's kind of this battery, right? They're like, oh, he's defective. We're going to flush him, right? And so he's physically now removed from his place. And he's sent out into the cold, harsh reality, and gets picked up, right? And so now he's like, oh, this is the real world. So that's him. That's definitely that moment of, he's meeting with the mentor is saying, look, I think this is what you want to do. He accepts the call, he crosses the threshold, and now he's physically transported into an extraordinary world that his brain is trying to process, right? So he can't just instantly be like, okay, here we are. I'm out of the Matrix. It's it takes time. And which is why, stories happen little by little, right? It's bit by bit. It's why we process change bit by bit. We can't do it all at once. And that's why storytelling is a lot like music, okay, which is great that you started talking about vinyl first and listening to music, is that they're both art forms that take place in time, right? You have to experience them moment by moment by moment, which is what life is, right? We are stuck, for better or worse, we're stuck in time, right? We are temporal beings. And so you have to experience things moment by moment by moment. And so storytelling is so powerful in that we're seeing these micro decisions and micro changes. And little by little, we're moving forward, moving back, moving forward, moving back, until ultimately we make, we make our way around to if we think about it in a Kubler-Ross sense, right, we start with shock, right? We go into denial, right? And then we're get angry, right? And then we do some bargaining. And so, all of this is these first phases, right? The call to adventure, that unexpected event, that's the shock that just says, boom, this is what's going to happen to you. And you're like, no, it's not. Nope, I don't have to deal with that. And that's all denial. You're right. I don't want anything to do with that. And then you cross the threshold. You're like, oh, I'm so mad, but I'm going to cross. Fine, I'll go, or you get over there and you're mad that you're over there and you're like, okay, I know what I do. I'm going to hang on to Kim 1.0, my old way of thinking, and I'm just going to do what I know works, and I'm going to power through this. And then you end up falling flat on your face because, Kim 1.0 is not going to get the job done. And so, so that's kind of this, if we think about, phase 1 of the hero's journey, and then now we're in phase 2, we're in the extraordinary world, but we're still clinging to our old mindsets, and we're mad about it. So we're like trying to come up with like, what's the littlest that I have to change in order to get what I want?
Yeah. So so in the Matrix, he meets the cast of characters on the, I forget the name of the ship.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Kim's looking it up while I
know,
talk.
I'm going to look it up.
So it's a long name. I know that.
The Nebuchadnezzar. There you go.
The Nebuchadnezzar, yeah. So he meets the cast of characters on the ship. Obviously, there's a love interest there and so on. And then Morpheus starts testing him. Like there's a scene where they fight in this virtual world kind of thing. And Morpheus is by far superior and is sort of pressing Neo in many ways to sort of let go, like to believe more in who he could be. That's there. But one of the ideas that I like is this, you're encountering allies and enemies along the way.
Yeah.
And I think one of the important things as we translate the hero's journey into real life, I think there's some nice sort of, I think it works.
Absolutely.
In terms of thinking about your own life, is you need enemies to make a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need challenges that if it's as I like to say, anything worth doing is going to be difficult. And so you can't resent enemies. Right? You have to embrace enemies because they play an important role. Now, what might the enemy be in a pandemic? The enemy might be, right, a loss of a job, or the enemy might, there's a lot of enemies don't have to be Darth Vader. Right. They have a lot of faces. That's right. Enemies can be tornadoes, and enemies can be, right, like that kind of thing. That's there. But one of the things I like in this thing is that you need, and this fits my solo but not alone idea, is you also need allies. Yes. To do the hero's journey, you don't do it alone. You need Morpheus, and you need Trinity, and so on, as much as you need Agent Smith.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's just so great about that is
By the way, if you're listening to this and you don't know The Matrix, first of all,
you should probably go watch it first.
It's worth watching. It holds up pretty well. Yeah. And secondly, I'm a tiny bit sorry.
Only a tiny bit. You should have watched it by now. I'm pretty sure. That's on you. Yeah. So just this idea that with enemies, right? You need the bosses that you hit at the end of the level, right? The baddies that you have to come up against, they're testing you, they're training you, they're helping you build resilience and giving you new skills and teaching you things about yourself. And you're actually getting information about how to win later. Right. So, and so, I think even in times like this, right, if we flip to reality, right, realizing that oh man, I'm struggling with change, right? Like everybody is, but I get new information. Sorry, the kids are home until next September. That feels like an enemy to me. It's a cognitive dissonance, and it takes me down for 2 days. So knowing that when I get, a ball of chaos dropped in my lap, knowing that about myself says, okay, so how do I beat that? I've come up against this at least 3 times in the last 4 weeks. And usually I'm down for 2 days, right? Trying to get my head wrapped around what now. But now I know that about myself. And so what I can do is I can say like, okay, new information. I'm going to go ahead and email my people and be like, hey, I'm taking a personal day and I'll get back to you about this stuff. Not today, but tomorrow, whatever. But like, stop trying to just power through everything, like learn something and apply it differently. So, I mean, that's just a really small example, but like, this is something that I've been constantly being tested about. And it's like, are you going to just keep trying to do the same thing over and over? Or are you going to, learn what you need and go, oh, okay. I'm not just going to keep going head on at this bad guy. I'm going to, I'm going to learn some moves, right? Like,
yes. I would say this. One thing that is important for folks to understand is friends and family sometimes are allies and sometimes they're enemies.
Absolutely.
When it comes, so for example, let's suppose that part of your hero's journey has something to do with pursuing a solo lifestyle. Right. So suppose, for example, being in quarantine with your partner may be the call to action that this relationship, right, is not worth having, right? And you resist it, of course, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your friends and family may serve an ally function, which is they may get behind you and help you make these changes.
And they go, finally, you're actually seeing the light. We've been telling you this.
That's right. Or they may not, right? They may say, no, you shouldn't do this. Don't do this. This is scary. This is bad, right? And so just because someone is, you have affection for them, you're fond of them, you trust them, you care about them, doesn't necessarily mean that they're playing the ally role.
Right. Because if you're changing, it's threatening them, right? Like, so your change is their own, maybe call to adventure that they are absolutely refusing. They're like, no. So people want to keep things status quo. They want what they know. And, because it feels safer, even if it isn't.
Well, think about this. Imagine you have a drinking problem.
Yeah.
Right. And your call to action is you have to stop drinking.
Yeah.
Right. That's the change that you have to undergo. And maybe crossing the threshold is seeing a therapist or going into an AA meeting or whatever it is. What's fascinating is your drinking buddies may become the enemies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Alcohol is the villain. But, and that's really tough. That's like a tough situation that demands a complete change of who you are.
Right.
There. Yeah. And so I think that's useful to recognize as you're undergoing this.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What's next?
Okay, so as we're going through these tests, and we're getting skills, we're making allies, we're getting a glimpse of the enemy, we're maybe having a showdown with them. We're going to get to a really crucial moment in the middle. Okay, so if we're thinking about this in sort of 4 quadrants, right? We've had our ordinary world in the first quadrant. And then we accept the call and we step into the extraordinary world. So maybe we're in a new physical location, but we're still clinging to that old worldview. Now, this moment when we hit the middle is, it's kind of like, so specifically in the Matrix, it's, it's kind of this meeting with the goddess, right? It's when we go see the oracle. Oh,
the oracle. Yes.
Right. So this is the midpoint. And what this does is this is really where it's one of the story structure books that I really like. It's super short. It's by James Scott Bell, and it's called, write your novel from the middle or something like that. And he talks about the midpoint being a mirror moment. So it's really where you have to kind of look at yourself. And you have to see things really, really clearly. And so, if you think about it, I can't remember which one it is. One of the Star Wars movies where Luke literally goes into a cave, right?
It's in, it has to be in Empire Strikes Back where
because he's training with Yoda, right?
He's training with Yoda, and there's like this scary, it's like a tree or a cave or something like that. And because
he goes in there and then he ends up seeing, he kills Vader in the cave and he looks and it's himself, right? So it's like, it's this kind of thing where you kind of have to face down, the thing that you're most afraid of. Like you kind of have to face down these things and you get something there in the middle, right? There's something that happens that allows you to cross. It's almost like you're crossing another threshold, but this time it's an internal threshold.
Yeah,
it's a mindset threshold. And it's where you basically surrender, kind of the things that were holding you back in a lot of ways, and you start to embrace the change. So you know, if you think about it, so I have this really nerdy analogy about, you know, like a caterpillar, right? Becoming a butterfly, right? So, so if you were to use this, you'd be caterpillar in the ordinary world, and you'd be like, okay, so then jumping into the extraordinary world is like, I'm going to make a cocoon or a chrysalis, right? Like, and so your whole part in the extraordinary world is you sort of going through this weird change. You're being broken down from what you used to be, and then you're going to be rebuilt into this other creature, right? So the midpoint you can imagine is when you take a big shift where you are fundamentally less caterpillar and more butterfly, right? So it's almost like there's not a quick, like, you know, you don't go from 49% to 51%. It's like you went from like 40 to 60. Like it's a big like jump where you get information that you actually cross over. We
call this in like mathematical modeling, we'll call this a step function.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's like this
it's like a major turning point. Yes.
It's a big jump.
It's a big jump.
Okay.
And so the midpoint of a story, you know, this meeting with the goddess, this, you know, entering the cave, like, you know, different stories kind of have a different feel about it. Sometimes it can feel like a low point, and sometimes it can feel like a high point. It kind of just depends on what the story needs. But it's basically this shift that makes you change, right? So in the Matrix, right, you know, this whole time Morpheus has been telling him, you know, I think you're the one. I think you're the one. And he's like, I don't. And so then what's so interesting is that the Oracle tells him, sorry, baby, you're not the one.
You're not the one. You've got the gift, but you're not the one.
But you're not the one. But then she tells him gives him some information about that you'll have to choose between your life and Morpheus's life. And Morpheus is this guy that's just poured everything into him. So just Neo having this information that Morpheus's life is going to be in his hands at some point, like, makes him like sit up and take note. Like he starts to, you know, so getting that information, it lights a fire. It ignites him to be like, well, who cares if I'm the one or not? I am not letting Morpheus die. Right. Like, so, and in him accepting that makes him start pursuing things at a different level, which is how he comes to realize that he's the one.
Yeah. The idea is that at that moment, Neo isn't the one.
Right.
Like, so the Oracle, right? The Oracle, he's not the one. He has to become the one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but that trade-off sets him on that path. One of the things that I really like about the hero's journey, as I have I have like 5% of the knowledge that you have, Kim, when it comes to this. But I love this idea because I like to just keep translating it into life.
Yeah. Yes.
I like this idea that oftentimes the hero is on a physical journey, that there's some physical thing he or she needs to accomplish. Maybe that you need to beat Apollo Creed in the fight. You need to, blow up the Death Star. You need to save the Ark of the Covenant, whatever it is, that's there.
Yes.
But in order to do that, you have to undergo a psychological change.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that is really fascinating in the sense that for those of us who see this pandemic as an inciting incident and it's going to set us along a hero's journey we would not have otherwise gone on, to recognize that you're going to have to change something about yourself. In order to do it, you're going to have to reinvent yourself, create a new identity. And then, of course, the thing is you're going to have to address the thing that scares you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's this kind of an interesting kind of chicken or the egg phenomenon, because on the one hand, right, you have this external journey is this kind of this thing that prompts you to start to have to change internally. And then you making this internal change is what helps you solve the external one. And so it's just, but then in the end, you're different and you get to take that internal change with you. After this adventure is over, you're now this other person and you get to keep going with this new. So it's very, it kind of leapfrogs itself. Everything's connected and they beget one another.
Yeah. It's funny, once you know this, I actually don't think it hurts movies for me. I actually think in some ways it kind of enhances movies.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because you can then pick things up. You get to feel smart sometimes when you watch a movie. You know what I mean?
It's always looking for an opportunity,
Right. If you watch enough movies, if it's a Hollywood movie, it's going to probably end well, and you know that it's going to be uncomfortable until the climax, so to speak. So one movie that I really find visually it's a beautiful movie and it's an exciting movie is Mad Max Fury Road.
Okay, I have not seen it.
It's okay. And so Mad Max is a loner, so this is a franchise that's been around for 30 plus years, 40 years or so. His family is killed and he's out in the wastelands, post-apocalyptic world. And in Mad Max Fury Road, it starts with a voiceover with the Tom Hardy character speaking and talking about survival. And the way you survive is to run. You survive by being unencumbered and being run.
Right.
So what's fascinating is in the movie, he ends up getting hooked up with the Charlize Theron character and another band of allies there, and he has to and he's sort of thrust into their world. And what's fascinating is what I wish I could remember the director's name comes up with, is he leads you down this path where you sort of feel like the movie's going to sort of end anticlimactically. And so with the Mad Max character going off on his own, and then this sort of band of allies crossing the desert, so to speak. And what Max does is, and the director even goes so far as sending these people out and having Max watch them as they're, going off into the sunset, so to speak. And then the next thing you know, he's like flying, chasing after them, stops them, and says, "This is how we do this." And what they basically have to do is they have to turn around and go back into the heart of the fight, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what was great about that is that Max, and of course they're triumphant, as you might imagine, because it's Hollywood. What Max had to do was overcome his instinct, which is to run to survive.
Yeah.
Right, and he had to actually then continue to band with these people and go in completely the opposite direction, right back into the heart of the battle.
So he shifts from being a loner to being connected, and from running to facing, right? It's beautiful. Those sort of things are so, they're so metaphorical and they're so great. And so what I would guess, just based on what you said, is that moment that happens, him realizing, he sent them off, right? And then him realizing, nope, this isn't it. That's sort of this epiphany. That's the reward moment in the hero's journey where you realize he gets, new information and he realizes something, and then he goes and gets them. That's sort of, this is like the road back. He goes and gets them and says, we got to turn around and go back. And so they turn around and they head back. That's the road back. And this is a kind of shifting into the final thing. So then they will have their final battle, right? Their final showdown. Okay. So that's what that moment sounds like to me. Would be that final road back where he's learned what he needs to learn. And now he's had this internal change. And now it's time to put everything together and have the final face off with the baddie. And that
in the Matrix, the example of that would be when, Neo stays to fight Agent Smith.
Right? So what I would say,
or would it be when they go to rescue Morpheus?
Yeah. So let's see. Let me think. So we have.
We shouldn't do this. It's too inside baseball.
It might be. It is. So we can nerd out about it later, but because I think it's because for anyone who's interested, right? So because to me, what it is it's just a framework, right? It's like having a model of the solar system, right? It's like understanding, the way that, atoms are put together like this, something that, it's kind of like we can't really look at it with our eyes, but we can have this model and then we can understand how it works. And so then you can apply that to things. So understanding story structure and understanding the hero's journey or whatever it is, to me is just it's a framework that you can apply to your life. And whether you're a writer or a screenwriter or novelist or whatever, like understanding your own cognitive functions, because that's literally all that it is it's a pattern that we have created as humans because it's how we operate. It's how your operating system works. So this is just giving tangible, imagery and archetypical characters and, making up weird names and symbols in different images for you to make sense of a process that's happening to you, whether you're aware of it or not. So I always hold, I mean, and I'm a story nerd, so I think it's great, but I always, encourage people to, just like if you're working with a therapist or if you're working, on doing, some personal growth and those kinds of things, like there are different models that you can get a hold of to help you make sense of your environment, right? And stories do that. So that's, whether it's journaling your own story or, kind of looking back at your life and creating a timeline of events and trying to understand what are these big key moments, right? Who are the different characters that I've had to deal with? And it just looking back with that hindsight helps you make sense of it. And so that you can, then you can really step in as the protagonist in your own story and not a passive character and become active. And you can start saying, okay, I've been passive and maybe I've had all this other crap happen to me, but I'm going to, I'm crossing a threshold now and I'm going to do it differently. And you can start becoming more active. And I just think any of those kinds of tools are so empowering, that, I think it's one of those things like, why not? Why not lean into it?
So in one of the early episodes of Solo, the title is "Why Are Superheroes Single?"
Yes, I love that episode.
The hero's journey comes up, and in it, I kind of talk about this the way you're talking about it right now. You're talking about it from a writing standpoint, but I use the term. So I like to ask my students, "Are you the hero in the movie of your life?"
Yes,
I like that idea. Like I think it's important. You can be an ally in someone else's story. That's fine. I guess hell, you could be a villain, an enemy in someone else's story. I guess.
Yeah.
But in your own story.
Yeah.
In your own story, I want you to be the hero.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think you deserve to be the hero in the movie of your life. But what I like is this idea of I like to say, are you the director of the movie of your life, right? Like where you can then start to exert more control over the things that happen, the decisions that get made, and so on. And so I like what you're saying is to understand the model is empowering. Like even though the average person will never write a story that may rely on the hero's journey, understanding the framework, the model can then help you craft a life.
Yeah.
Right? Because, it's just the thing is like you can't have good without bad. You can't have wins without losses, right? You can't have good guys without bad guys, and so on. And so I like that idea. Okay. So let's tee this up. So there's the confrontation with the villain. Right? There's the internal change and the external triumph or change.
So it looks like we missed one step though. So let's just back up for just a second.
Please.
And so, after we kind of have this, this sort of this midpoint, meeting with the goddess, the cave, whatever, where we have this major shift, that kind of leads us into this preparation phase where we're really starting to take action now. Like we're preparing to go get Morpheus, right? Like we're gonna bring out all the guns, download me all the software in my head, and we're gonna go and we're about to kick some ass, right? So we're getting ready and we're gonna have.
Oh, that's the training. That's the Rocky training montage.
Yeah. Yes. Right. So if you think about the midpoint in Rocky, right, that's when Apollo chooses him, right? Apollo Creed chooses Rocky at the midpoint. And basically this is now Rocky's chance to prove himself, right? So he has to rise above. And that's when Mickey's like, look, man, you need a manager, right? And so, he's like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And he really shifts from being passive to being active, right?
I see.
And same with Neo. He shifts from being like, what? I don't know, man. And he's like, no, I can do this. And let's go. And so you start really taking action, and trying, you're starting to apply things, right? You're starting to try something new too. It's not something old. Like before, the reason why you got your ass kicked in the first part was because you kept trying to do it the old way. So now you're starting to shift and go, I know, I'm going to try to do something new. And so you'll end up, having this face off, right? Like we might rescue, you can rescue Morpheus or whatever happens. And so, but we'll end up having is this, like, if they call it the ordeal, right? Or the crisis, in the hero's journey. And it's this face off. And what will happen is you'll have something, really positive, but also something, really negative. And lots of times it'll lead you to, we call it the all is lost moment, right? So the rug just gets pulled all the way out and it's all is lost. And then it's from that moment, this dark night of the soul moment, that's when you get the reward. That's when the epiphany comes. And it's like, you have to hit rock bottom first if you're really going to change, right? So what's so interesting is if you kind of jump back to the beginning and you think, okay, we're in our same physical location and our same mental, I'm hanging on to my worldview. Then I'm going to change physical locations, but I'm still going to keep the way that I was thinking. Then I decide to shift my thinking. But it's like, I've only changed it a little bit, right? I haven't come to the absolute breakdown. And that's why you always have to have that all is lost, total breakdown moment in a story. And that's when, things seem darkest, but that's when the epiphanies really, really do come. And so, I think it's really fascinating. So I think and this really does feel like in that moment in the Matrix when he turns, right? Like you're saying, he turns to fight Agent Smith, right? That's feels like his reward of, he's basically saying, I think I can, like he's not gonna, it's interesting. It makes sense that it's archetypically similar to what you just described in Mad Max. It's instead of running, we're going to shift.
Yeah.
Because that's been the thing. You run, when you see agents, you run, right?
Yes.
Like, and now he's like, no, I don't run because I know what I can do. Like he's believing in himself. So he turns and he shifts, right? So I think you'll see
I think that reversal is a big part of a lot of heroes' journeys.
Yeah.
Is you have to reverse course in some way. Like that, the transformation is so radical that you have to do the opposite of what you would normally do.
Yes, absolutely. It's fascinating.
So I think, I'm going to keep bringing this back to changes as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think that this is useful for people to recognize that this will not be easy and that you might have to make a very fundamental change.
Yeah.
And you might encounter, what did you say, the all is lost moment.
All is lost.
Right? You might feel like this is not working and the temptation is to potentially give up.
Yeah. The
question is rather than give up, by the way, there's no shame in quitting, but there's shame in quitting too soon. And so to recognize that you might have to do additional work to see
and I think
through.
Having the framework of, the way that stories operate, right, is really, it's the most useful when things are at their bleakest, right? And so, because then you can be sitting in your all is lost moment in my, dark night of the soul, and I'd be like, okay, this really sucks. But I go, wait a minute. This is that moment. Like you can acknowledge this is the low point. Oh, okay. So I have nothing left to lose then, right? And so if you have nothing left to lose, if you're at rock bottom, then there's a whole kind of like freedom in that, right? A freedom to try something new, a freedom to, you can surrender what you've been afraid of losing this whole time, right? Like, so there's new life that comes in that. And then from there, you're able to that's where I feel like that's where ingenuity and innovation and all of these really amazing creative, things can happen because of really bleak moments. So I think that's probably the story of humanity right now, right? We're kind of all stuck in one of these moments.
Yeah.
So then what does that mean for us?
And will you let go of your old self?
Yes.
Right? Will you let go of the old way of doing things?
Yes.
That's there. All right, that's neat. Okay, so now what?
So now we have our epiphany. The road back is basically where we're picking ourselves up out of the all is lost moment, and we have new information. There's a bunch of different, people have their own sort of interpretations of this, so they bring their own language, right? So the way that one person put it was the Q factor, right? So it's like the, if you think about a James Bond movie, right? There was Q would give him a bunch of cool shit at the beginning of the movie, and then there'd get to this point when he's like, what am I going to do? And he's all is lost, right? He's no way he's getting out of this. And he's like, wait, I have this thing.
My exploding pen,
right? And so there'll be this thing. And I think that what we find is that when we're talking about our own lives, there's stuff that's been planted in your life earlier, right? There's conversations, there's, other experiences. And so when you get to this all is lost moment, you get a shift in perspective, so you can see all of that stuff that came before in a new way. And it's like that Q factor. You're like, oh my God, I have this, right? Like you start to recognize, you look around, right, at the, what do I got? I got to MacGyver my way out of this, right? What do I have? What can I use? And that can prompt you to find, your actual inner gift, right? And the hero's journey is all about releasing the gift, right? And every person, has one, right? And it's about you self-actualizing and coming to bring your gift to the world, because that's what we need, right? We need people to show up in the fullness of who they are and give their gifts. And that benefits the whole, right? And so the road back is really starting to recognize, like, okay, you like pull your team back together, right? Let me go get my allies, right? I might have to mend some fences. Maybe I offended a few people, but hey, look, I'm sorry about that. Let's get back together. Let's, I need you to help me with this final. We got to go face down the bad guy, whatever. Like there's this, you kind of pull all your resources together. You pull yourself out of the mud, pull your resources together, and then you're heading for your final showdown, which is where you're kind of this returning to, you're on your way back to the ordinary world, and you're going to have one more face off with the villain. And this is where you get to bring everything that you've learned in this journey up until now, you bring it to bear. And now you're not, I'm not Kim 1.0 that was back at the beginning of the story. I've went through so much shit since then. And I have learned from each one of these things, and I've gained skills, and I've got a sword, and I've got a shield, and I've got, all this stuff. And so now I'm ready, right? Now it's time to show up and have your final battle and make a sacrifice and share your gift, right? Whatever it ends up being. So that's that final battle. And then when it's over, there's, you go home, but you go home changed, right? You go home different. And now what you have in you and all of the experience that you've gotten from this journey is the elixir, right? You have your information, your knowledge of, like, you get to go be someone else's mentor now, right? You bringing back the elixir of this experience that says, I've been to the cave, I've been to the all is lost moment, and I am coming out the other side, and I have something to share with you, right? And so when you have experiences, coming back and telling your story of what it was like when I was there is what helps people change, right? And so and that's the power of storytelling. So whether it's a memoir, whether it's, someone at AA, like sharing their story, right? Whether it's, someone with depression, like posting on their blog, like, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is, like to share your story, talking about being solo on the podcast, like you've got to do this stuff so that people don't feel so fucking alone, right? Like it's really, really important.
Yeah. Like I would say, I could not have done this podcast at age 25.
Yeah.
I could not have done this podcast at age 35. I could have done it at 45. But what I like to say is this is the podcast I wish I had when I was 25.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so getting out on the other side of it, it hasn't always been easy sort of embracing a solo lifestyle because it runs counter to the norms. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of friends and family who end up playing the enemy role at times.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, they're acting in a way that they're trying to help, but they're misguided in terms of that.
Yes, they still can be, conflict, and an antagonist isn't so much about being bad. It's just that their goals are in direct conflict with your goals. You end up becoming obstacles to one another.
Yes. Oh, that's good. That's it's not evil per se. It's just different goals.
And you get in the way of one another. Yeah, for sure.
I love that idea of when you return to the ordinary world, a changed person, that then you have the ability to play the role of mentor.
Yeah.
I think that's really neat. Like, it's sort of like Skywalker becomes wiser as the trilogy moves on.
Yeah.
That's really
he gets to show other people because, and it's like we need that, right? That's how we get to pass on knowledge and information and these really valuable lessons because, Obi-Wan died, right? Like he's not around anymore, and so people have to pick up the mantle, right? We got to carry the torch, for the next generation about these are the things that matter. And you can see that in storytelling, right? Like we go from the oral tradition to now we're writing stuff down to blah, blah, blah. And, one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but I figured we would get to it at some point is that the whole reason why we do all of this stuff is to help get people's needs met, right? So when we talk about Maslow, right, Maslow's hierarchy, we don't have to think of it like a hierarchy, right? You don't have to think of it as these, you have this one path, but you can just recognize that everybody has these needs and sometimes they're operating at different levels. So in the story grid world, we think of them more like gas gauges, right? Sometimes they're high, sometimes they're low.
Talk for the listener who doesn't know the story grid. I don't think the average person knows what.
Yeah,
what it
probably
is.
not. It's very niche.
Oh wait, before you say this, before it slips away, what's interesting talking about? So you talk about Rocky.
Yeah.
In later films, he becomes the manager and the teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yes, that's perfect.
So I don't think the average person really knows the nuts and bolts of the hero's journey, obviously, but they certainly don't know what the story grid is. What exactly is it? So
the story grid is a methodology created by Sean Coyne. He was an editor in the big 5 publishing houses for 25 plus years. We've been saying that probably for several years, so it's probably been 30 now, but he's business partners with Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art. And the story grid was basically his method that he came up with as an editor to help his clients, to communicate to them, here's what's working in your book and what's not. Because, the way he would describe it is like, he gets handed, a manuscript and I've got to get this thing ready to publish in the soonest amount of time so that we can, the way publishing works, we got to make money. And so he came up with this process. And originally, he's a very intellectual guy. And so he came up with a way to basically, you can quantify, right? Qualitative and quantitative anyway, to measure if a story is working or not.
So it's almost like, you check this box, or you give it scores.
Kind of, right? Like you're looking at these specific criteria. So you're looking at, and basically, story operates kind of on two lenses, basically. You have the macro global story that we've been basically talking about with the hero's journey. That's this macro, spine, right? Like, do we got these major moments? Can you see these big shifts happening? Is the story progressing in a way that's cognitively making sense to the reader? And then you have this micro stuff, which is like the scene by scene, moment by moment, beat by beat sort of stuff in a film. Like if you think about it in a film, you might have a scene and you have, lines of dialogue, you have these actions, you have these micro things that are happening that culminate into a larger change. And so you have all, it's very arcs within arcs, Russian doll. It's all very like things repeat and then they build upon one another until they ultimately have this climactic ending. And so he has ways of looking at the macro lens and then looking at the micro lens. We look at it scene by scene, and there's all these qualitative and quantitative things that we can look at to try to make sense of what's happening. And is this stuff, is it going to be satisfying for a reader, right? Is it really going to be something that they're going to have a a transformative experience by reading what you've written or whatever. And so, so it's his process. And so he wrote a book on it, The Story Grid. There's a podcast. There's the original Story Grid podcast. And then there's the one that I'm on, which is the Story Grid Editor Roundtable podcast. And we, watch a movie every week and analyze the crap out of it, doing all kinds of weird stuff. And, it's an absolute blast. So for diehard story nerds, there's really, you can't beat it. But I don't remember why I was originally talking about that.
I don't remember either.
Oh, I was going to tell you about Maslow. Okay, so in Maslow's hierarchy, right? So what's interesting is if you look at the different genres of storytelling, so you have an action story, maybe you have a performance story, a war story, crime stories, like there's all these different types of stories, love stories, and there's like worldview stories, right? There's all these different kinds of stories, and they map directly onto the kinds of needs that humans need, right? That we have to meet, right? We have our physiological survival needs, we've got our safety needs, we have our love and connection needs, right? Belonging, right? So, and one thing, so like whether or not you want to be solo or partnered, you still need connection, right? Like we still need love and connection in your life. So you still have that need, even though it's not, so there's other stories, buddy cop stories, right? You got a great buddy love story, right? That show about, it's basically that people are better together, right? Our powers combined, right? Like, the Avengers or whatever. Like you have people are bringing their unique gifts to the table and then you're combining them for these really awesome outcomes. Performance stories that are esteem, right? Those are all like your esteem level stories, and self-actualization and self-transcendence. So you have genres that map directly to these needs because, again, the whole point of storytelling is it's a way that our ancestors helped each other get their needs met so that we didn't die, right? Like, don't die. We need you to live. And so we're telling all these stories. And so even now when we're telling, it's entertainment, but they're prescriptive and cautionary tales of how to get your needs met, right? Do this and good things will happen. Don't do this because bad things will happen, right? And so, so it's just fascinating about understanding like ways you can get your needs met. And I think looking at your own life again is such a great way to realize, oh, well, that did not work. Look at the cautionary tales of your own life. Like, man, I really should have listened to my own instinct and not done what my mom wanted me to do. Like, that's a great lesson that you can reflect in your own story and figure out, maybe some of these things. So, it's so fascinating to see how storytelling maps to, Kubler-Ross, how it maps to Maslow. Like there's all these pieces. And that's really what Sean Coyne's work is all about is, being able to tie them to, the sciences and the humanities really come together in a really special way in storytelling. So,
so if I could try to connect this back to what I started off saying is, so I had mentioned these sort of three categories. So one is health. Another's relationships, and another is career, right? So I can very easily see how this pandemic can be an inciting incident for any of those. So we've already alluded to the relationship one, obviously, right? So you have someone who is not as supportive as they need to be a life partner, for example. The health one, I think, is it can be rather clear also, right? So think about this, if you are a smoker, if you are overweight, if you have poor health, you are at much greater risk from this virus than someone else. And so this might be that kind of wake-up call that says it's time to make some improvements in life, as I like to say to my students, is your health really number one? When you really get down to it, is your health really number one? Now, of course, like the hero's journey around changing your health it's not trivial.
It maps really well.
Right? It maps really, really well, right? Allies and enemies and all his lost moments and having to not only change your physical, but change your psychological, right? Like I think that you could just imagine building a hero's journey around your transformation of your body, and then obviously, it goes without saying the career ones, right? Whether that be, finding new work, pursuing a new career, whatever that might be. Okay. So I think what we should do, Kim, is we should wrap up here. I'm going to say thanks to you in a moment, but we're going to come back for some bonus material, and you're going to dissect a few well-known stories using the hero's journey. Yes?
Yes, I am.
All right, super. Well, I'm excited about this because I'm always excited about this. I always feel like the bonus material is always the best part.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, thank you. This
Kim,
has been great. Yeah,
this is super great. I knew it would be. I appreciate you taking the time and prepping all of this. I know how much you have going on.
This stuff's easy to talk about. It's fun. It's easy to show up and talk about stuff that you love, and hopefully that you think are good tools for people to, take some control over a chaotic situation. So, absolutely.
I think they are. I definitely do. All right, that's great. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, we're back for a little bonus material. Kim is still here. She has not hung up on me.
Everyone's still being quiet out there, so that's good. I think I heard the dog barking at some point, so we'll see if it came through.
I think we'll be fine. I asked Kim to prep a few stories that she was going to dissect with the hero's journey. I have no idea what these are. I don't know if I've seen them or read them. So we'll see. So Kim, what is your first one?
Okay, so the first one that I figured, with being as big of a blockbuster as it was, probably everybody's seen it or something, is Avatar. So I thought we would talk about Avatar. Pete, have you seen Avatar?
You know what? I've never seen Avatar. Can you believe it?
No, I can't, but it's fine.
I know there's no good excuse, except it's like 3 hours, right?
It is. It's 2 hours and 41 minutes. I went to check a clip of it today, and I was like, Jesus, that's a long movie.
Yeah. But I have no excuse, because as many movies as I've seen and as much as I enjoy film, just because of, it was a groundbreaking movie because of the special effects.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's okay. But based upon the hero's journey, I should be able to still understand what goes on.
Yeah, I think so. So what's interesting is the ordinary world in this story is actually still kind of extraordinary. And so then the real extraordinary world gets even more extraordinary. And so that's why I like this. It's fun that way. So, we have Jake Sully as our protagonist, and he basically, the story opens with him waking from hypersleep, right? So he's on a ship headed to the planet of Pandora. He's been in hypersleep for like 5 years, and he wakes up and he's there to do a job, right? His twin brother has died, and so he's there to take his place, because they have the same genetic code, right? They have the same DNA, so he can take over as the avatar driver, right? So they grow these avatars that are like a mix of human DNA and then a mix of the Na'vi, which is like the native humanoid type creatures on the planet of Pandora. And they grow these giant, they're like 7 or 8 feet tall. Like, they're just huge, right? These bodies, basically this kind of like dummy clone bodies that are then driven by the avatar, right? Or Jake Sully. So he's like, kind of goes into this, I don't know, it's like laying in a weird sort of tanning bed, and he's like, his mind basically connects because of his DNA to be able to be in this body. So anyway, so that's the premise, right? So he's going to this crazy world. He knows he's going to do this avatar thing. He gets there, but he's still with the humans, right? He's on this like military base. The whole reason they're on Pandora is to mine. It's one of those, corporate bad guys versus nature, right? It's totally that story. And so he's still in his ordinary world, and, he's sort of a fish out of water already. But he's with humans, he's kind of like, there's the scientists, and then there's like the military jarhead kind of guys. And so he's kind of just learning how to navigate between that. And so he gets a couple cool things happen, right? He gets to drive his body. Oh, I've left out a really important piece of information. He is paralyzed from the waist down. Okay. So he was a Marine. He'd been in a war. He lost, he got hurt in the spine, so he cannot walk. So for him he's in a wheelchair. He shows up on this planet in a wheelchair. For him to get to go into this tanning bed and become a badass, avatar of this Na'vi, like, he gets to run again. Like, so there's these cool things happening for him. That's just like, this is amazing, right? And so I would say, his real sort of call to adventure, his challenge, is that the main military bad guy, right? Basically wants him to be a spy, right? He wants him to be a spy because the whole thing is, again, they're there to just plow through and they want to just take all the, whatever, the ore that they're mining for. Mm-hmm. And so Jake's job is to be a spy, to try to figure out a way to get the natives to leave their home tree. And so he's like, and if you do it, I will get you shipped back home and we will get you the surgery so you can get your legs back. Right? So there's kind of like this challenge, right? That he's given from the military guy. And so he has this sort of thing and he goes out on patrol. And again, this is still all sort of ordinary world for Jake. Like he's still kind of like just doing his job. So they go out on their first patrol. He goes out with the scientists. Basically, they try to take samples. They want to learn how this world works. It's an amazing, everything's connected, sort of like bioluminescence, and there's all kinds of fascinating things. So while they're there, they get separated, right? Some big crazy panther sort of animal separates them. And then he meets, basically he's about to get totally eaten by this panther. And Neytiri, who is the Zoe Saldana character, right, in this film, and she is a Na'vi, right? So she is one of the native creatures. So she saves him. And so this is really, I would say, is that sort of meeting the mentor moment, right? Okay. So he's been challenged between, he's seeing how amazing this world is, but he's also being kind of like challenged by this general to kind of, be a sneaky guy. And so he's got this sort of dueling sort of thing. And so then he meets Neytiri, and she basically is telling him that he is, he's an ignorant. She calls him a baby. She calls him a child, like all these things, like, because he doesn't appreciate nature. He's just clumsy, like, all this stuff. But he ends up winning her over. And then she agrees to take him with her. So then they kind of cross the threshold together. So now he gets to go kind of be in her, gets to meet her people, gets to go to home tree. Like, so he's doing it on this idea that he's kind of infiltrating, right? He's like, you got to teach me. Right. So him passing into the extraordinary world is going from being sort of an outsider to an insider, right? So he's on Pandora the whole time, but he's an outsider, and then he becomes an insider. And then he basically gets access. He gets access, to, be trained basically by them, to learn their ways, all of these things, to kind of act as this sort of bridge go between. But it's all under this like deceit, right? Like they're thinking that it's going to be for good, but he knows that it's really for bad. So Tess, allies, and enemies, are really, he like learns how to ride their version of a horse and he sucks at it. There's a sort of there's this sort of weird love triangle thing going on. So there's like the love rival that hates him and wants to kick his ass, right? Like there's all kinds of stuff like that that's happening. And then he constantly has to shift between being in his avatar body and then waking up back in the lab and having to get back into a wheelchair. So there's a lot of like all kinds of stuff like that going on.
So when is his all is lost moment? So
his all is lost moment comes after he wins Neytiri's affection. He's totally one of the tribe. Like all these things happen. But pretty much the bad guys decide that there's no way to have a peaceful sort of, they're not going to get them to leave peacefully. So they decide that they're just going to bulldoze through and they're just going to take everything out. So Jake has to come and give them that information. And they're pissed at him for lying to them and like being deceitful. So they kick him out of the tree, he's not allowed. Then they blow up the tree. There's the whole thing gets totally destroyed. And he's, totally rejected. And it's really it's like the military jarheads have won at this point. And the Na'vi people are completely displaced. They have, it's just like the land's just being pillaged at this point, right? And him and his scientist buddies are all locked in a cell back at the place. And so from that moment, that's his ordeal, right? He tried to save them. He wanted to save them, right? He wanted them to leave peacefully so they wouldn't be destroyed, because over this course of this time, he's learned he loves them, right? He's fallen in love. He loves the culture. He's really like, his whole mindset is just awakening to how amazing nature is, all this cool stuff that's happening to him, right? And realizing how shallow all of these other pursuits are. So eventually they get a buddy of theirs, Trudy, she's the helicopter pilot, she breaks them out and they go back after the tree is destroyed and they escape. Basically, they escape. And one of his scientist buddies, Sigourney Weaver plays Grace, is injured. And so this is their moment. Kind of, it's not quite to the road back yet. It's this transition moment between, basically he's stepping up in a new way. And the major thing for Jake's character is having something to fight for. So that's kind of what's, when we think about, if you think about the Mad Max story that we talked about, right? I always got to run, right? Like it's that sort of thing. So this moment where he's like, kind of thinks that everything's meaningless and he's pretty much just been out for himself to get his legs back and all these things. And now he's realizing that I have something to fight for. I have something worth dying for again, right? Like maybe he used to feel that way, but after his injury, like he's kind of, life's kind of meaningless and it's all whatever. So now he's realizing that this is worth fighting for. And so that's his epiphany. And so what he does is he goes and his sort of like turning back and facing, I'm going to go turn around and chase the bad guys now. He goes and he flies on his sort of pterodactyl bird creature thing. And he flies up really high and he actually takes over. It's like an even bigger, colossal pterodactyl bird thing that nobody rides anymore. Like it's been generations since one of them have ridden one of these. So it's his way of like winning them back over is he figures out, he basically, domesticates it, right? Like kind of in a second. And he flies it into their temporary camp and they're all like shocked. And so that's his road back is basically, he kind of has to win them back over by showing that like, I'm here, I've done this amazing feat, right? He kind of has to prove himself again because he deceived them. And so that's his crossing back over to he has to do something extraordinary to show that he's changed, right? He's doing something that no one else has tried. He's willing to, most of the time they call that big bird the last shadow because it's the last shadow you'll ever see before you die because it's so big and so scary. So for him to make that sacrifice and to prove it, like that wins them back over. So then he's able to rally all the forces. They believe in him now. They trust him. They get all of the tribes together and then they have a final battle against the bad guys. And there's such a kick-ass moment when it really is starting to look bad. Like the helicopter goes down, like people are just falling left and right. Like, the military people are winning. And what happens is that all of nature, right? Like basically all of the animals come and join the fight, like on their side. So it becomes the whole planet basically like comes back and fights back. And so anyway, it's great. And the final reward is that Jake they do this really awesome sort of, ritual that they're able to transfer his consciousness from his broken body all the way into the avatar. So now he's fully the avatar and he no longer has to switch back and forth between the bodies. So, that's Avatar.
That's a great one. So first of all, thank you for ruining the movie for me.
Yep, you're welcome. It's totally your fault. So it's fine.
It is. It completely is. One thing I like about hearing that is, Avatar was celebrated for being this sort of visually stunning, incredible special effects movie. But let's be honest, the movie doesn't make a splash the way that it did without this strong story.
Right. Well, and it's kind of I was seeing a blog and it was saying like, it's Pocahontas, it's Dances with Wolves, it's all of these sort of like, outsider becomes the insider kinds of stories. And we've seen them over and over again. And sometimes they're done well. And sometimes they're totally, appropriation, which I've heard a lot of appropriation, arguments for Avatar, which, there's certainly validity to that. When it comes to the story, right, about someone who is really acting in their own self-interest to find something worth fighting for, to make a sacrifice for, and then to be integrated in a new way, like it feels good. Like it feels really good. So it's very satisfying in that way.
Neat. Do you want to do another one? Yeah.
Okay. So the next one that I've got for you is A Christmas Carol.
Oh, wild.
Which everybody knows A Christmas Carol. And what's really, again, and that kind of another interesting twist on A Christmas Carol is that he doesn't leave his town. He doesn't leave his bedroom, right?
Okay.
But he's taking, it's sort of the extraordinary world here is through time and space, right? And it's emotional, right? It's this, it's very much an internal journey for him. So
Yeah.
So the ordinary world for Scrooge, right? He's a rich miser. He's selfish, right? And so we get dropped in on him on Christmas Eve. And you know, the ordinary world is established. It becomes very clear to us who he is because he has people calling him like, hey, can we get some donations? You know, and his nephew comes by and is like, are you going to join us? And he's like, bah humbug. I don't want anything to do with that. So we see him for who he is. Right. And then I would say his call to adventure is, you know, Bob Cratchit, his super nice employee, asks for the day off, right? Like he's like, hey, can I have the day off tomorrow? It's Christmas. And so what's interesting and what you kind of see here is sort of a false step, right? So Scrooge, first he's like, I don't know if I want to, no, I don't want him to take the day off. But then he decides, okay, fine, you can have the day off, but you have to come in early the day after Christmas. So it's like, he's like, so to him, he's thinking he's being super generous, right? So it's sort of a false acceptance of the call in a way, because it's like, I'm being really generous to you, but he hasn't actually changed at all, right?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of his ordinary world. And then what happens when we talk about meeting the guide, it's he goes home and he sees the ghost of his deceased partner, Jacob Marley, right? He sees it on the door knocker. He sees like these other sort of ghostly images happening. And it turns out then he gets this warning that there's going to be these 3 ghosts that are going to visit him. And
that's his mentor. That's his mentor.
It's kind of like, it's sort of an interesting mix between the mentor and also like this threshold guardian character. It's kind of, so he's kind of being sort of sucked into the extraordinary world. And so into this place where ghosts talk to him and, these things. And so then he goes to bed, and then he's awakened by, we have the ghost of Christmas past, and then we have the ghost of Christmas present. And then those are basically the rest of sort of his ordinary world. And he goes into the past and he sees, his old boss. He sees that was really nice to him, like what a good boss looks like, right? He knows, he's seen it. And he's just chosen not to, right? So that's really important for Scrooge. He saw the girl that he wanted to marry. And then he saw, in Christmas present, he sees like the nephew's party that he didn't want to go to, and he sees them kind of making fun of him. And then he goes to the Cratchit's house and he sees that Tiny Tim is really, really sick, and he sees the life that, Cratchit is living, and he's just like, oh my gosh. So what I love is that after these moments, so these are really, you can see these are his trials, right? He's going through these different ghosts. These are these tests that he's going through. He's having to kind of see himself and the way that he was, and people that would have been allies in his life, but he rejected them, right? And so now he's finding himself alone. And so then we get to, he's at this point where he tells the ghost of Christmas present that I'm changed. I get it. I'm changed, right? He feels like he's really made it. He's like, that's great, but you still have one more ghost. Like you still have one more ghost to come. And so then, he has to face, the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And so this is really where I feel like we really hit that, the all is lost moment is having to face down, that the future, right? Tiny Tim has died. Everyone's celebrating his death. He has to see his own grave, right? And this is where he realizes that he begs for his life, basically, right? He begs for his life. He believes he's going to die. He begs for his life. And he has to realize that if he doesn't change, he's going to end up like Jacob Marley going around with all these chains. And so this is really that all is lost, like ordeal moment. And so then when he wakes up the next day, right, his epiphany is I'm alive, right? Like, oh my God, like that's this reward. He went through this whole experience and he wakes up realizing that he's alive, and now he has a brand new sort of lease on life. And now it's like, okay, he had that experience. Is he really going to change or not? That's kind of his final test. Is he went through this whole experience, but now it's time to kind of put his money where his mouth is, right? Literally put his money in other people's mouths, right? So he goes out into the, he's giving money away, he's doing all these things, and then he ends up showing up at the Cratchits. So this is his final showdown to go back to, it's kind of you see these sort of bookends, right? Of the person that he wronged in the beginning, he goes back and he makes it right. And he makes sure they have money. He gives them a raise. He does all these awesome things. And, and so Tiny Tim gets to live because of Scrooge's sacrifice. And so that's really the reward, is that Scrooge is going to get to go on and have a meaningful, fulfilling life because he's generous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Tiny Tim gets to live. And so having that legacy that he's leaving behind, which is like, so Jacob Marley is the cautionary tale that says, look, man, if you don't change, this is what's going to happen to you. And so Scrooge learns that lesson and he becomes the prescriptive tale. So
that's great. Wow. Yeah. I wouldn't have guessed you were going to do a Christmas Carol. That's fantastic. Can we do one more quickly?
Yeah. So
one more?
The other one I want to do for you, which I'm going to have to just leave it kind of as a teaser because there's this whole other thing that we didn't even get to talk about today. But if we talk about Frozen, okay. So Frozen is not a hero's journey. It is another archetypical story that's the inverse of a hero's journey. And it's called a virgin's promise story. Okay. And Rocky is also a virgin's promise story. So they're
I've never heard of this.
I know, it's fascinating. There's a book by Kim Hudson called The Virgin's Promise. Uh-huh. And I should tell you the full title because it's fascinating. And I think, so here's my theory. And I would love at some point, maybe we should do another one of these and talk about the Virgin's Promise, because I think that a solo person is a virgin in the Virgin's Promise story. Oh,
that's fast. Wow. What a teaser in the bonus material.
I'm just trying to get myself back on the show. This is what I'm doing. Because it's about, the thing about the Virgin's Promise story is it's about becoming, right? It's about being. It's not about doing, it's about being, right? So what I love about this, so the Virgin's Promise is writing stories of feminine, creative, spiritual, and sexual awakening. So it's really like if you think about, and this doesn't have anything to do with gender, right? These are just archetypes, right? So you have, the hero's journey is this very outward masculine story about going out and doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning to sacrifice is really a lot about what the hero's journey is about, learning to give up selfishness and to sacrifice something on behalf of someone else.
Yeah, the Scrooge one is a nice example of
that. And even Jake Sully, even Neo having to sacrifice, like there's all of these, you see sacrifice for others in a heroic journey. But a Virgin's Promise story is the inverse. It's the flip side. It's basically the story of the person who stays home, right? The hero goes out and leaves, and the virgin is the person who stays home and holds the shit together at home so that the hero can go. So what ends up happening is you have someone who basically, they have, rather than having an ordinary world, they have a dependent world. So they have
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
With Jimmy Stewart.
Yes. George Bailey. So what's interesting, George Bailey, oh man, see, I could nerd out on you.
All right, we shouldn't do this. We're going way too deep for the average listener. It's
so fascinating. So there's all this super cool stuff. So I want to tease you about the Virgin's Promise story and just tell you that the beats, so we talked about the hero's journey, we've got the ordinary world, we've got the call to adventure, we meet the mentor, we cross the threshold, tests, allies, enemies, right? We're going to go meet the goddess, go through preparation, the ordeal, et cetera, et cetera. And the Virgin's Promise is about, there's a dependent world, there's the price of conformity, right? And so I think if you think about this in terms of a solo person, right, the price of conforming to a world that doesn't fit you is horrific, right? And the dependent world is that people want you to just play nice. They want you to follow the rules, just get married and have babies and do all that stuff. That's what I need you to do so that I feel okay. Your mom needs you to get married and have babies so that she feels okay, right? Yes. And that's the dependent world. You depend on her, and she depends on you. Like there's all this stuff but there's a price to that. And so you'll find, so anyway, it continues with the opportunity to shine, dresses the part. And this is really all this sort of like kind of moving ourselves into, and rather than the extraordinary world, it becomes the secret world. And so it's basically you're using all of your magic in secret. So if we think about Frozen.
Well, okay, no, I'm going to stop you.
Okay, that's fine.
We are going to have a cliffhanger.
Okay, cliffhanger. I love it.
This is a huge cliffhanger. Solo's not known for cliffhangers, but
happy to set a precedent.
I think what we should do is we will return at a later date. I'm going to have you, because I don't even know anything about this.
Okay. I think you're going to love it. I think you're really going to love it.
We'll do a subsequent podcast on the Virgin's Promise.
Yes.
And as part of that podcast, we're going to do the same bonus material.
Yeah, and we'll do Virgin Promise stories.
Where you dissect a few stories from that.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Sounds great to me. And like I said, I really think your listeners will love it because it's their journey. It really, really is. That's
fascinating. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, super. Kim, this is what a nice little cherry to put on the top of this.
Thanks for letting me nerd out. I appreciate your patience.
No. It's great. I'm happy to do it. Okay. So, Kim, thanks so much. We will return at some later date with a follow-up podcast.
That sounds great. That sounds like fun.
All right. That's great. To everyone at home, thank you for your continued support. I am certainly thinking about you during these very troubling, tumultuous, uncertain, chaotic times. I do hope you are treating it as a call to action, and if I can help, please let me know. Cheers and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.com. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.